thank you all very much for coming today. I'm so excited to see you all here, and most of you are my dear, dear friends. So it's always a privilege to talk with you. And it's my third time speaking in this space, and I really appreciate the opportunity to be still co-creating with my oldest and dearest friend, Anjana Shakya. As she said, we were 3 teenagers together, Purna, herself, and me, just in love with the discoveries that we were making about this Newar culture and this culture of the Kathmandu Valley, which is in plain sight but not necessarily very obvious. And it's always a challenge to speak with you as a Western person, because compared to you, what could I possibly know? And at the same time, if I'm able to say something that passes muster with all of you, then I feel like I'm on the right track when I try to tell other people about the wonder of what I've learned here. I also try to keep things as specific as possible. I tell stories that are rooted in my own experience, and I try to avoid generalities because that's the only honest way for me to speak. And in this talk, I'm going to be going into a lot of detail. I'm going to be quoting directly a Newar elder in as close to her own words as the translation could make it. We taped her and spent days and days translating and transcribing. And I hope you'll bear with me so that you have a better understanding of what Pyakhan is, and as well as Shakti afterwards. So the Kathmandu Valley is ground zero for goddesses and divine women. But talking about Shakti is a problem. It really is. We see the immense power of the divine feminine here, while the female body is also denigrated all around us. And that's not a contradiction I'm going to be able to solve, but we should hold it and keep it in our minds. And we've just finished celebrating the Dasai festival, 10 days of worshiping Durga and other goddesses, so this is certainly an auspicious moment. And as before, I'll be telling stories, not giving an academic paper, and I hope you'll contribute your own stories afterwards. Today I'll be quoting 2 Newar elders in particular, Dilmaya Aji on the left and Jit Narayan Mahajan from the Nada Devi Pyakhan. And neither of them are alive any longer, but I thank them with all my heart, and I welcome their family members who are here today. Dilmaya's great-granddaughter, Palista, is here, sitting in the second row. I don't have any of Jit Narayan's relatives. And also Shyam Sundar Shrestha from Bode is here today. He is the son of the mitini of Dilmaya's daughter, and that's very complicated, but anyway, he's family. I'm also grateful to the Purna Museum of Newar Art and Anjana and Prajwal and Siddhartha, whom I've known since they were babies, for all the work you've done to create this unique platform. As they're building something wonderful here where we can not only appreciate Newar sacred art, a living tradition that goes back for over 1,000 years, but understand how these sacred images illustrate a larger Newar worldview, one in which the earth is both fertile and generative and conscious. The earth is alive in all of the same senses of the word that we are, both as physical beings who are infinitely creative, but also as thinking, feeling beings who are also responsive, who respond to each other. And that's kind of a very important point, that the earth is conscious. And this understanding that consciousness animates all matter, that consciousness is inherent in physical matter, is really quite radical for a Western person, at least, because we've lived for several hundred years as though the world is inert and dead. And the way we see the world has tremendous consequences for how we treat it. And the world that we see, that we've created, starts with how we see it. And the current exhibit here on Shakti is all about that, about a worldview in which material reality, everything, and all of us, is brought into being and set in motion by a sacred force, an intelligence, which you can't see, and yet which erupts in some places like a geyser of power you can feel. And that power is female. Chanira is nodding her head. She knows all about that. Understanding this is key to understanding a lot of what you see in the Kathmandu Valley, where the veneration of female power underlies an infinite proliferation of images and ritual practices. Of course, there are a lot of ways to talk about Shakti in this religiously rich, complex valley, where different forms of Buddhism and Hinduism coexist without much conflict, let alone in India and beyond. And what I'm dealing with here today is the Tantric Hinduism and Buddhism of the Newars as I know it. Most of you are very familiar with this image of the goddess Durga celebrated during Dasai. The goddess rides her tiger, and I think maybe I should just skip this whole part, you may already know it, which along with the lion is her mount or van. She carries all the weapons of the principal gods in her many hands, as well as the lotus and conch shell. You probably know the story already, that a powerful demon, Mahisasura, who took the form of a buffalo, threatened the earth. None of the gods can kill him. So Durga takes back all of her weapons that she lent the gods. They came from her in the first place. Vishnu's discus and mace, Shiva's trident, they're all actually hers. And calmly, serenely, she kills the buffalo demon. Goodness and balance is restored to the earth. The goddess protects the vulnerable and punishes evildoers. This is kind of Shakti 101. Like the very first grade understanding of Shakti, but it helps to illustrate that there is Shakti with a capital S and Shakti with a small s. Shakti with a small s is raw power, almost like electricity, or a certain kind of energy, or an ability, so even the weapons represent different Shaktis. And Shakti with a big S is a goddess, a personification or embodiment of this power or energy. And when you see Shakti, a Shakti with a lot of hands holding different things, those are all representing her powers or her abilities to do different things in the world, to execute various things. But each of those powers or energies could also split off and take form as a unique goddess. So it could get confusing, and it helps to remember this. Durga is found all over Nepal and India and beyond. But to understand the way she and other goddesses are worshipped in the Kathmandu Valley, it might be helpful to talk about tantric religious culture just a little bit. Newars practice religion differently from the way hill people worship. Very embarrassing to talk to an audience of Newars about Newars, but I'll keep going. Their Hinduism and Buddhism has its roots in the tantric tradition. Tantra is not a religion of its own. It was a countercultural religious movement in India that began over 1,000 years ago as a rejection of the asceticism that made denial of the body the route to salvation. So you don't have to starve to death, you don't have to stand on one leg for 10 years. Instead of inherently polluted, the body was seen as divine, an embodiment as necessary. You can't get enlightened without a body. Sex, meat, and alcohol were not sins, but sacraments. So you're going to offer meat, you're going to offer liquor. Singing and dancing are primary forms of worship. So you think of the different dances and bhajans. Caste hierarchies were rejected in search of a radical equality. And we still see that in the Bhaji feast where castes can eat together. And above all, in tantric religion, the female is not denigrated, but is worshipped as primary, auspicious, and generative. And Kathmandu is the place where these ideas found very fertile ground, and this became a hotbed of tantric practice and tantric practitioners, a place where fresh revelations generated original texts and practices that spread to other parts of Asia and especially Tibet. So if you ever think that tantric Buddhism started in Tibet, that's not true. Everything started here and spread outward. In tantric religious culture, there's a big emphasis on gaining personal power through meditation and mantras, but especially by getting close to deities, mostly goddesses, through ritual means and devotion. And in the last few decades, there's been a big influx of outsiders into the Kathmandu Valley, many of whom are Orthodox Brahmins and Kshatris from the hills, and that's competed with this tantric valuing of the feminine and made it harder to see. But Newar religion has actually been under siege since the 18th century when Prithvi Narayan Shah conquered the valley and subjugated the Newars. And tantric religion, anyway, has this emphasis on secrecy, on hidden things happening at the middle of the night, on esoteric texts that are almost impossible to understand. Dhamaju, right? So, the more orthodox forms have always been more visible. What's this? Okay, now what do I do? Okay, you do it. Today I'm going to focus on the Pyakhan in the old agricultural town of Bode near Timi, and in Nara Devi in the heart of Kathmandu. So we do have a representative. I'm thrilled to have Prem Shasta here as the principal dancer in the Bode Pyakhan, but we also, Alok Tuladar, Siddhi Tuladar, is also very involved with the Nara Devi Pyakhan. Pyakhan are sacred mask dance dramas that happen all over this valley, with each Pyakhan dance troupe associated with a specific locality. Men take lifelong roles as deities, most of them goddesses. These are usually the Astha Matrika, or 8 mother goddesses, along with Ganesh and Bhairab, and the lion and tiger, though there's a lot of variation. They usually include Vaishnavi, Brahmayini, Indrayini, and Rudrayini, as the Shakti forms of Vishnu, Brahma, Indra, and Shiva, as well as Mahakali, Kumari, Barahi, and Mahalakshmi. This is different from the Charya dancing you've seen performed here in the past, in which our Kumari Chanira does. Most of the people involved are from the farmer caste, but it is one example of a Newar religious tradition that has helped me understand Shakti. Nowadays, most Newars of the farmer caste aren't doing any farming. Where would they do it? All the agricultural land in this valley has been cemented over and built houses on. But that wasn't true when I first came to the Kathmandu Valley as a child in 1970, when my dad was posted to the US Embassy. And back then, this whole place was alive with radiant green fields, an abundance of rice, which supported the vibrant culture and religious life in the old cities. And farmers were at the center of it all. When they weren't tending the fields, they were busy playing the drums for religious processions, or carrying the vessels and offerings needed for pujas, or cooking feasts. Later, I learned that these Japu farmers worship the goddess Vasundhara, who holds a sheaf of paddy in one hand and the Pragya Paramita, the text on the teaching of emptiness, in the other, in the form of a lump of mud in their fields. The soil had inherent within it both the fertility needed to nourish the body and the wisdom needed for enlightenment, with no contradiction between the two. And to understand Newar religion in the Kathmandu Valley today, it's important to remember that it was rooted in agriculture and a thriving natural world within living memory, within my memory, within Thomas's memory, within Anjana's memory. For me, maybe that's, yeah. For me, entering this beautiful world as a child was a shock. There were no shopping malls, no supermarkets, and nothing to buy, at least from my point of view. There was no TV, no magazines, no pictures of women and girls on billboards advertising toothpaste or motorcycles or anything else. Instead, the depictions of the female form were sacred in the form of goddesses. The divine feminine was everywhere, as vividly carved images of stone or wood or metal in temples and shrines, or just a stone or a row of stones, or even a hole carved into a wall. Regular worship of the Dhyas was woven into daily life, so I saw goddesses being worshipped all day long, every day, when I was a little girl. Within a short time, that's Anjana and me, within a short time, I suddenly felt the best I have ever felt in my life. And that feeling of spiritual and emotional well-being, a roaring, joyful vitality, only increased over the nearly 4 years that I lived in Kathmandu. I've never forgotten that feeling, which originated in my body, so I know it's real and true. So I'm allowed to talk about it. I have always wanted to know what exactly produced that powerful well-being, and that's what started my lifelong research into Kathmandu Valley culture. When I first returned to Kathmandu in the 1980s, the green fields were vanishing. At the same time, the sacred images of the dyas in the temples were disappearing, only to reappear after being stolen in museums and private collections abroad. I became worried that something precious would be forgotten. Anjana and I began to seek out Newar elders, asking them questions and recording their stories. I was particularly interested in how the female-centric tantric tradition might appear in the life stories of individual women. So that's how we met Dilmaya Aji, a Japu or farmer caste midwife from Janabahal in the heart of Kathmandu, Alok's neighborhood. Dilmaya was already almost 70 at that time, and she was rich. She had bought a lot of fields with the money she'd made, and sometimes when we went to see her, she would have just returned from planting paddy, knee-deep in wet mud. Unfortunately, I wasn't interested in farming at the time, so I didn't ask her about it. Dilmaya and I were both preoccupied with power. She was a tiny woman with a loud voice who dominated her entire family and her neighbors. And unlike most Newars, she did a lot of bragging. Most Newars do not brag very much or talk about what they're doing. But she attributed most of her success to being in the right place at the right time and getting the help of powerful deities, mostly goddesses. That started with being in the Kathmandu Valley itself. As a midwife, she worked with the female body at its most dangerous and powerful moment, giving birth. Part of her skill we would describe as medical, but another greater part was putting the laboring woman at the imaginary center of the Kathmandu Valley and calling on 4 of the tallest hills at its rim, deities in their own right, to help birth the child. Her skill at pleasing various goddesses made her a better midwife. And she and many others frequently told me the story of the sacred origins of the Kathmandu Valley. And you may already know these stories, but bear with me, because I think they're quite important. 2 stories. One you might call Hindu and another Buddhist, but both describe the valley as a kind of sacred generative womb in deeply female terms. In the first story, the great god Shiva's first wife, Sati, had died. Shiva was crazy with grief and flew around and around the world carrying her body over his shoulder. Now Sati means truth, and because Sati embodied the truth, she was incorruptible and so didn't decompose. The other gods became worried, so they invented flies, and the flies eventually caused Sati's body to start rotting so that pieces of it started falling off. Any place where a piece of Sati's body landed on the earth became a powerful Shakti peak in its own right, a place vibrating with primordial female energy that then took personhood in the form of a distinct goddess. The Gujeshwari temple, now at Pashupatinath, is considered to be where Sati Devi's vagina fell to earth, and what could have more Shakti than that? The goddess Gujeshwari's name simply means the goddess of the secret. You can see a painting of Gujeshwari in the current exhibit. The temple is forbidden to us foreigners, but Dilmaya told me that the goddess there is simply a holy hole in the ground into which precious fluid seeps from the earth. And in the second story, the Kathmandu Valley used to be a lake ruled by Nags or holy serpent deities. A Buddha from previous ages flew over the lake and dropped in a lotus seed. The lotus took a deep root in the fertile generative mud at the lake's very bottom and slowly grew up and out of the lake until it bloomed into a huge flower, flashing rainbow light. The lotus represents enlightenment, but to grow, it needs the earth's nourishing womb. The Bodhisattva Manjushri came and sliced through the edge of the valley to drain away the water, so that human beings and gods could come to live together in the holiest place, most conducive to achieving enlightenment on earth. Even now, Gujeshwari is where the lotus seed took root, and Swayambhu is the lotus flower where it bloomed. Dilmaya did not make much distinction between Hinduism and Buddhism, seeing them instead as a continuum, and worshipped regular Hindu deities, Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, and goddesses more associated with specific places than either religion. To me, both stories imply that the earth of the Kathmandu itself is vibrating with Shakti, generative power available to those of us who recognize it and venerate it. This womb of the valley is fertile and auspicious, but it doesn't only generate physical matter. Inherent in it is truth, wisdom, and enlightenment. Dilmaya and many other Newar elders told me that even to be born here is the greatest good fortune a person could have. And with that, I certainly do agree. So now I'm going to turn back to the Pyakhan, or sacred dance drama that I mentioned earlier. At midlife, Dilmaya was suffering. And this is all based on her taped interviews, which Anjana and other translators and I translated word for word and wrote down in English. So this is as perfect as we could make it. Her husband had left her with 5 small children to support, the youngest still drinking her milk. Her uncle, who was a powerful tantric, advised her that if it came into her mind to visit a deity, she should go. It would mean that the Dya was pulling her and would help her. There's Bode. Sometime after that, she was invited to a feast by people who lived at Changunarayan near Bhaktapur, and late that night on the way home, it suddenly flashed into her mind that she should visit Barahi, a goddess whose shrine was in the middle of a jungle on a hilltop above the village of Bode. That was a 2 or 3 hour walk from her home, and it took a lot of guts to walk up through the jungle in the dark, but she did it. She said she felt no fear. It was December and very cold. The stars were shining. As she walked through the forest, she suddenly saw a huge tiger radiating light, the van or sign of the goddess Durga. And once she reached the top, she bowed to the shrine. As she bowed to the shrine, a tiny book appeared on the mandap, and saying a prayer to the goddess, she took it and she stuffed it in her waist wrapping. According to Dilmaya, the little book was full of powerful mantras that allowed her to instantly diagnose and then heal a vastly expanded variety of ailments, including mental illness, and she started to get wealthy from that day. She said, after I met her, my life caught on fire. Since I met the tiger, I started to blaze. My name spread. But she never attributed her success to anything but the Shakti of the goddess Barahi. Whenever she concentrated on Barahi, the cause of a client's illness and the correct cure would flash instantly into her mind. And I should add here that when she walked back down from Barai's shrine that first night, Dilmaya said she encountered a notorious witch along the way. She fought with the witch fiercely, without fear, and defeated her easily so that she'd never troubled people again. With Barai's Shakti inside her, she was already vanquishing evil, just as Durga subdues demons. Dilmaya took Anjana and me to visit Barai's temple many times. It was a simple open roof shrine in those days. The goddess was a vermilion smeared rock. I couldn't understand how people had come to know that this was Barai, or even that there was a powerful goddess in this spot, a Shakti Salidya. How did a powerful place, a place where primordial energy or Shakti gathered and vibrated, make itself known? And why was an apparently genderless Dya with the face of a wild boar associated with the goddess Durga or Bhagwati? How does Shakti develop a face? Without answering these questions, Dilmaya gave me some clues by telling me the story of Barai's Pyakhan. After that night, Dilmaya developed such a passionate love for Barai that she walked to the temple to offer puja and back every Saturday, 5 hours round trip across what is now the airport. She wanted to serve the goddess more and more and more. Below the temple in the village of Bode, there was a Pyakhan, or sacred dance drama, dedicated to Barai, which takes place every August right after Gai Jatra. It came into Dilmaya's mind that she should feed the Dyagona, or the group of people who dance the Pyakhan, as an offering to Barai. She said, when a lot of sick and crazy people came to be treated by me, if we brought them to the temple 5 or 6 times, they would just be cured. I would keep them there at the temple after offering puja and give them a feast. There's an open space a little way down from the temple next to the jungle, and sometimes there I could hear the drums and cymbals and horns of god music, and sometimes we would even hear the thumps of dancing feet. It could be heard as far away as Bode. That's how it is. It isn't small gods who stay in the jungle there. It's big, big gods. Once a year I go and offer a big feast there where they do the Pyakhan mass dances. The Pyakhan is in Bode, but it's said that the gods are also dancing in the jungle up at Nilbarai's shrine. It started hundreds of years ago. There was a Japu farmer who vanished from his field. He had gone to check the little ditches that irrigated his fields. He left his hoe on his coup on the side of the field and disappeared for 4 days. People went to look for him and saw his hoe, but couldn't find him anywhere. At the same time, though, it seemed like it was inside his house, even though he wasn't there. There was a sound like feet dancing coming from his room. While a woman was cooking rice upstairs, she heard the sound of the ankle bells that dancers wear. The sound of bells went jalang, jalang, and she wondered where it came from. She was alone cooking, and the sound scared her. After a while, she heard dancing, and then she heard cymbals. Finally, there was a blast of the ponga reed horn. She said, "Uh-oh, there's something weird going on here." She had the rice ready, but she was too scared to go downstairs, so she stuck her head out the window and started yelling for help. She told them how she heard music and dancing, and everyone agreed that all the old people should gather and go look for the missing man. They climbed up to the temple to begin their search, and there he was, sitting quietly beside Nilbarai Dya. He stayed mute without being able to say a word for 4 days. Instead, he stayed in his room dancing all day. Then, this is still Maya talking, then the wise old people asked the man, "Why do you dance? How come you were lost?" He said, "I was taken by Nilbarai. I was taken to the forest. The goddess said, 'You dance like this, and you teach the others to dance too. At the time of Gumpurni, Gaijatra, for 4 days and 4 nights, you can't go to the toilet, you can't eat, you can't drink. Even if you get soaked by pouring rain, you're not allowed to stop. You burn these 2 big torches and teach others. You do it like this, and you teach the others.' The goddess said, 'Take people from this place and that place, and from this lineage and that lineage.'" Whoop. When the elders of the village heard what he had to say, they said, "What was taught to you? Give it to us too." They established a guru by pulling Nasadya, the lord of the dance. When they pulled Nasadya to preside over the teaching and the Japu started showing them the dances, all the dances came divinely revealed. The gods possessed them and danced their bodies in the correct steps, so they were learned. Nilbarai possessed them first, and as soon as Nilbarai got into them, one of them really seemed to have changed into the form of Barahi, a wild boar. He had the snout of a wild boar. He became really famous. So in this story, we see that a specific place on the earth or even a rock has an energy that can draw people to itself, that people can feel. That is Shakti with a small s, that female power or energy. But the power is also conscious, intelligent. It talks, it interacts, it responds, and it takes on a divine personality, a goddess who is a Shakti with a capital S. And ultimately, it takes on a face, represented by the masks the possessed dancers wear. As in other Pyakhan, the goddesses trace the boundaries of a certain territory with their steps. In the case of Bode, the edge of the old village which has now grown beyond it. Some of them hold rusty swords as a symbol of how they protect their territory and everyone within it. The main Nilbarai dancer, who is here with his wife, Prem Chandra Adwaishrestha, explained that the relationship between the people of Bode and the goddess Nilbarai is reciprocal. If the dancers fulfill their heavy, very strict, lifelong obligations faithfully, the goddess remains powerful enough to protect the village from all harm and keep the crops fruitful. So far, we are doing it, he said. Nilbarai is one of the great ones. During the 2015 earthquake, not a single person was injured in Bode. That's pretty incredible. I was in Bhaktapur, which is a different story. Now, I'm going to turn to a different Pyakhan, the Nara Devi Pyakhan in the heart of old Kathmandu. In this case, the principal goddess has a large and elaborate temple, many stories tall, full of gold and silver, and there's enough stories about this temple and enough to learn to fill up an encyclopedia, and I'm not the person to do that, but believe me, it's worth looking into. Her image is that of an old woman, emaciated with jutting cheekbones and chin and a network of fine wrinkles all over her face, which at this age I certainly appreciate. She is known as Nardevi, also known as Nyetamoru Ajima, and also as Swet Kali. What I know about this Pyakhan, I learned from the late Jitnarai Mahajan, also known as Ice Cream Mahajan. He wasn't one of the dancers himself, but was one of the gurus and main members of the Guti that organized the Pyakhan, and he taught the musicians who accompanied it. He said, "This Ajima is very old, which is what makes her smarter than the others. That's why her cheeks and her chin stick out like that. She's very sweet, very kind and gentle. She forgives us easily." His experience of the Dao was so different from my stereotype of blood-drinking Kali goddesses as ferocious and frightening that I realized that he knew her in a different way than I could imagine as a distinct living personality. Ice Cream said that a long time ago the area was a dense forest. The king of Kathmandu was hunting when he was attacked by a fierce wild elephant. He took refuge in a large tree, and when the elephant neared, the tree somehow miraculously hid and protected the king. Later, the Ajima goddess revealed herself to the king, who worshipped her. In this case, the goddess and the lesser goddesses around her were forced to reveal themselves on demand by powerful tantric practitioners of Kathmandu who used mantras and other means to make the goddesses appear. The other goddesses were also each compelled to reveal their unique dance steps. Ice Cream explained each goddess is a living energy that moves through this world. If we can't see them moving through their dance and they stay invisible, how are we going to know them? How can we worship each one as required? But Nardevi, the main goddess, was too strong for the tantrics. She refused to reveal her dance unless she was offered a human sacrifice. In the end, the tantrics persuaded her to take the blood of a sheep instead. She was satisfied, and the Pyakhan was established. The Nardevi Pyakhan is a tense drama rather than tracing a boundary. Swet Kali Ajima has a very powerful daughter in the form of Kumari, also known as Chandeshwari, who wears a small red face covered with pimples or boils, which have erupted due to her rage and frustration. She fell in love with a powerful daitya, or demon, completely in love, so that she lost her mind. Oops. So there they are. There she is. In this case, a daitya or demon isn't someone scary looking, with a bulbous nose and fangs. A daitya is someone powerful who is selfish or greedy, whose energy is out of control, trying to take over the world for his own gain. There are a lot of daityas in politics and business around the world right now. That's me sticking in my opinion. They cause war and suffering. Chandeshwari's demon lover seems quite handsome with a mustache. Swet Ajima circles her daughter around and around, trying to persuade her to give the demon up as they shake their swords at one another in a mother-daughter conflict to no avail. Finally, all of the goddesses hide behind a white cloth to brew an enchanted tong, or rice beer, which they feed to Chandeshwari. Under the spell of the Moini, Kumari Chandeshwari kills her demon lover. She is the only one powerful enough to do it. I'm not sure whether I'm in the right place with my slides, but in this case, a daitya or a demon isn't someone scary looking. No, I've worried about that. If the goddesses are Shaktis, divine embodiments of energies that benefit the world, part of their job is to transform destructive energies that harm the world and everything in it. Ice Cream explained that human beings have a role to play in the world by nourishing positive energies in the form of goddesses through recognition and devoted worship. So they need us to worship them. With Newars, that is taken quite literally in the form of food offerings and feeding the gods. You must nourish what you love. You must feed it. In her grief, In her grief and anger at what she was forced to do, Swet Ajima's daughter runs far away to live in the Chandeshwari temple in Banipat. In this way, goddesses who are strongly associated with a particular place still make connections with other temples and other deities. These invisible ties become visible during special Pyakhan every 12 years,
when the dancers dance all the way to much farther places. While possessing the dancers, the deities stop to dance for and show themselves to all the deities and temples along the way. It's like their steps are tracing threads of Shakti, divine power, through the landscape, connecting this valley into a sacred geography. Bhaktapur's Navdurga Pyakhan, possibly the most famous one in the valley, also walk to a network of different towns and villages barefoot. They don't ride the bus. I remember once I joined them in the old town of Panalti. It was after midnight when they danced to the edge of the field at the boundary of the town. There were very few people around. Suddenly the electricity went off and we were plunged into thick darkness. The goddesses didn't stop dancing. I could hear the jingling of their anklets and the stamping of their feet as they went on dancing and dancing in the dark. So as Anjana said, this is not a performance. This is not entertainment. Something is happening, whether it's in the dark, whether no one's watching. It is something that is trying to create well-being and very powerful. It seems clear that Pyakhan dance dramas draw on the generative power of the earth, Shakti as mother who makes the crops grow and animals and people fertile. The mother goddesses are also terrifying, displaying the fiercely protective and territorial aspect of female power. What may be less visible is their deep wisdom, their connection to the power of the enlightened mind. All of the Kathmandu Pyakhan have strong tantric elements. And of course, when we're talking about tantra, we're talking about a real emphasis on your inner life, on meditation, on becoming enlightened. These include a secret dressing room for the deities, which is called the Ahache, or House of Letters. In this case, the letter means a syllable, or a mantra. Each dancer is given specific mantras for his job, which he cannot reveal. Before putting on the goddess's heavy silver jewelry, the dancer has to meditate. Each goddess or dya wears silver necklaces inscribed with her own yantra, a geometric diagram that holds or traps Shakti, particular to each dya. So that's a yantra we don't know who's from the internet. On the left, just so that you get an idea, but each one is wearing a different yantra. Each yantra is a diagram that is specific to a deity. You might notice that before the dancers put on their masks, but after they're wearing their white jama skirts and silver jewelry, people come to bow to the necklace or the yantra, which is charged with the goddess's energy. They are not bowing to the human being who wears it. Sometimes masks are put on a throne or on a series of chairs, and people bow and make offerings to the masks. It's when the dancers put on the dya's face or mask that they become possessed by the deity, displaying mudras or esoteric gestures made with the hands and fingers as they dance. And mudras are especially important in Charya dancing. These are a kind of shorthand for mental and spiritual attainments such as fearlessness that are meant to inspire the same in devotees watching. And the men who take on lifelong hereditary roles dancing the goddesses in the Pyakhan help us to see the nature of tantric Shakti worship. Their lives are dedicated to serving a goddess, from the purity rules they keep to daily meditation, pujas, and faithfully keeping the obligations to the kuti or group organized around Pyakhan. So Mr. Shrestha, who dances Barahi in Bode, has been dancing for 67 years continuously since he was 7 years old. That's faithful. In the past, you could recognize a Pyakhan dancer because they weren't allowed to cut their hair. And they had a little bun at the back of their head. You might still see that. They also didn't wear trousers, but went around in a white skirt called a jama during their daily life. And a great pleasure for me was to see someone in a jama with a little bun in line at the bank and thinking, oh boy, you're a goddess. Their identification with their goddess is often so complete that their neighbors will call them by the name of the goddess, not by their own name. And this is really what tantric deity worship is all about. It is the point of it, identifying with the deity in order to awaken and recognize our own divinity, our own enlightened energies. The purpose of worshiping a goddess is to be one. Until we realize our own divinity, though, becoming close to a goddess is the next best thing. As when we love a goddess and she loves us, she protects us and empowers us with her Shakti. I asked my ice cream Maharjan why it was men who danced the goddesses in the Pyakhan. Since they're female deities, why can't women do it? He answered gently that the goddesses have too much Shakti and their jewelry and masks are too heavy for a woman's body to bear, and besides that menstruation and childbirth, which come at unpredictable times, would make it difficult to perform the Pyakhan on schedule. In any case, the women from the dancers and musicians' families all participate in the bhuti and are necessary to all of the pujas. But a larger question does remain: why women suffer inequality and oppression in a society that worships the divine feminine. There's a picture of Chanira when she was Kumari. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about that. And although I don't have an answer, it is also true that Newar women traditionally have had a lot of visibility and power, which can translate into other areas, and does. Being worshipped as a Kumari, as a lot of little girls go through a Kumari puja, when she was a little girl, has given Anjana a lifelong self-esteem and power to advocate for women's legal rights, for example. And I personally find it immensely empowering as a Western woman to think of myself as part of a living, breathing earth, which combines fertility and prosperity with immense creative powers that include the ability to think, reason, and feel. The paintings of the goddess in this show, inside, are like portals. They're not just decorations. They're like portals whose contemplation is meant to awaken these energies in us, men and women. Imagine what a beautiful world we can manifest if we see ourselves as inseparable from each other and our sensitive, alive, responsive earth. We need these new ways of seeing now to help bring back a verdant, blooming world where all people and other beings can live with each other at peace. Now, a lot of these deities are wrathful, and yet whatever its problems, the world that Newar's created, that I saw and felt as a child, was a lively, vital world, and also infinitely tender, of caring and being cared for. And that, I'm never going to stop talking about the tenderness of Newar culture. More than 20 years, I'm going to tell a story that I've never told before, and I think it's a very moving story, so I hope you can really take it in. More than 20 years ago, an old man who was one of the Dyapalas of Sweetbaida told me a story about Gujaswari, the goddess whose temple is the origin of the Kathmandu Valley. He said that once, a Rana general questioned why Newars poured offerings of ela and tong, rice liquor and beer, into the silver-rimmed hole that embodies the goddess, and why all the liquid disappeared. "How much can it take?" the general scoffed. He ordered gallon after gallon to be poured down the hole, but no matter how much went in, it never overflowed. The Rana general got furious, and he pushed a bamboo pole down the hole, but it couldn't touch the bottom. So he tied on another pole, and another, until finally he felt the pole push against the bottom. The Dhyapala wept and cried, but he couldn't make the soldier stop. When the pole finally pushed against something, the general pulled it out. And at the tip, there was blood. There was blood at the tip of the pole. Remembering this desecration, the old man telling me the story cried. He cried, just remembering that. And so, when we talk about Mother Earth and how war is no good, I think this story embodies a lot more. I hope this has given you some context to help you appreciate this wonderful show on Shakti. Thank you. And now I hope you'll all stay. We're going to screen a wonderful 10-minute film on the Bode Pyakhan made by Alok Tulada and his wife Sunita. I just saw it 2 days ago. It's absolutely marvelous. And thank you all very much for listening to me.
One question, Abby.
Yes.
You were talking about how people identify that particular stone was Shakti deity.
Yes.
How did they identify that? What was the answer you got from those people?
I have no idea to this day. I still don't know. I feel so sad that I don't get it. It's like there's this big in-group club and I'm on the outside.
When you there are so many stones in this valley that have a few rice grains and flower petals and vermilion on them. And if you talk to an old lady who lives there, she'll tell you who it is. But otherwise, I still don't know.
It's been
But-
there for ages, so people have been worshipping that spot for ages.
But I will tell you that when I'm in the United States now, this is not just the Kathmandu Valley. There's a beautiful new book by Niels Guthoff on rock and stone divinities that you can get in Vajra Books. I don't know about other bookstores. It's very expensive, but it's a very cool book. And all over Nepal, there are like rocks represent Nags or Bhairabs or Shaktis, and there are even field guardians. So up in the Mustang area that Thomas knows well,
That is a deity, that is a Nag deity or other deity that's protecting the field. But I still don't know how the Shakti is identified in the first place. I will say that now that when I'm driving through rural Virginia where my mother lives and I see a particularly wonderful rock, I say, I know you're alive.
so that's that. And if you have a question, is there someone?
If you have a question for Neil Barahi, the principal dancer here too, I'm sure you can ask that. Or for Chanira Bajrashaya, former Kumari and now Charya dancer. If anybody has questions about the sacred dancing too, or to the filmmaker.
Yes.
So what I've seen in Kathmandu Valley is like when we see the traditional martial dances, it mostly encompasses Astha Matrika, so there's all these divinities. But what I've found in Barahi is that there's a lot of faces of the same Barahi or Bhairav, or multiple faces of Ganesh.
I'm really glad that you mentioned that because that's something that I want to talk about at some point. But I'll have to give you breakfast if I keep on talking. I think that the point of this, there are a lot of local variations in each Pyakhan. This is the kind of, template, but it varies so much. But I think what it means is that Shakti is a kind of fractal thing where Shakti can be mirrored in many forms at the same time. And so one deity can coexist and take many forms at the same time. And she can take the same form in many bodies at the same time. And I think that the Neil Barahi Pyakhan is super interesting because it makes explicit this fractal process. I don't know if that helps, but yeah. Any other questions for anybody here?
I have questions. Actually, it's not a question, but I found this today's presentation very enriching. I mean, being a Nepali, I didn't know many things. I go to Bodhisattva, pray there. I go to other temple, pray there. It's like a ritual. But there are many things which we did not know, and I find it's really fascinating. And I'm glad that's how we could share these things with the young generation, young children from the early age, and then now we talk a lot about spiritual things. We have so much of comfort nowadays because of the technology and things, but somehow we lost all our spiritual part. And this is the presentation, this information as gallery, all this information can enrich our children, and I think that would be quite. I think that's sometimes I struggle myself.
I really appreciate what you're saying. You're talking about how this enriches the younger generation. And I think that what Anjana was talking about and what we're talking about is not entertainment. This is creating the kind of world that we want to live in. And whatever you believe about the world is going to manifest in the world that we live in. And if you believe that the world is alive and sensitive and responsive, then you're going to create a very different world and behave very differently in it than if you don't. And Western culture speaks very abstractly and explicitly. And Newar culture is like poetry. And one definition of poetry, which I really love, is called thinking in things. So instead of giving you abstract words about ideas, in Newar's think in things with their bodies. And it is like when you have a dream and you think, well, why is there a black dog there, and why are there 6 lotuses? What does that dream mean? It's the same with some of these cultural forms where there are very powerful ideas embodied in these different ways. So thank you. Anybody else?
Have you seen any impact of migration on this? Like,
Have I seen any effect of migration?
yes, on this sort of.
Yes, the Kathmandu Valley is turning into a retirement colony. Please don't leave. Anybody who's under 50, please stay. And I think it's having a very serious effect. And I do think that there are efforts, like there's a lake in New York, and there's a lake in Maryland, and they are really it's very difficult. It's like where you get the form of the thing but not the essence, and I don't know what the answer for that is. How you'll keep it. With Newars, a lot of culture is embodied in their food, carried in food, so people get really, really very, very taken up with food when they migrate. But the deities, how to keep those deities alive is a good question. Yeah. Anybody else? Okay.
So
Yes.
I have.
Yes.
So what is the likelihood of finding a new god in this present context with essence in Kathmandu Valley?
I think it's very likely. If you know anything about possession mediums, in the film, I call it a movie. That's not, but in the movie, one of them is saying, "Oh, so and so was shaking like a dyama." Basically, these are women who get possessed. Usually, it happens out of the blue, and then it comes at a more regular schedule. So there's a very famous dyama who's no longer alive in Swayambhu, and she would have deities who no one had ever heard of possess her and say, I am in this place and I require this kind of worship, and her devotees would be writing it down, and then they would go to the place to find the rock or the deity. So possession is one way.
So I was talking about the likelihood. Has it increased, or is it the same as it was before, maybe 60 years or 70
I think it's
years ago?
probably, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that question. Let's find out. I really don't. I know that it's possible. I don't know whether it's more likely or less likely.
Because I was connecting the dots, he was talking about migration, you were talking about Lake being depicted in New York, but without any Asians. So there is Lake, but no Asians. You might have new gods, but the question is about the Asians,
Right.
In
Right.
this particular
Right.
context.
Well, and then that begs the question: if Shakti is in the earth, if Shakti is inherent in the earth, you would expect it to bubble up in other places. And the question is, how do people perceive it, and then how do they characterize it? So this is a wonderful question. Yeah. And then there was another question. Yeah.
I actually don't have a question, but I have today's experience. It was like today, something was pulling me here. Like I didn't want to come here actually today. So, the particular experience, like I had program at JC's today, but I left there and I came here. I'm a little bit superstitious, so I watched my horoscope today. I watched and I came here. Right? Actually, a lot of wishes are being fulfilled today. A lot of wishes are being fulfilled. First of all, thank you for this experience. I get to meet him. Like I found he is my father's friend also.
You mean Neil Barahi dancer, Artya?
I got to know.
That's wonderful.
Got to know. And one thing about, I would like to know a little bit more about Sandeswari, because I pray to Sandeswari and I was just praying you would not say something wrong about Sandeswari. So I am sorry if something I disturbed you.
Did I say anything wrong about Sandeswari?
No, I don't know, but
No.
I was praying you would not say something wrong about Sandeswari. No, you, in between you said I'm sorry or something, I just,
Oh, did I say anything about Sandeshwari that was offensive? No. Okay, good. Yeah.
that's all.
Okay. So I'll just have one comment to what you said. And one of the emphasis on tantric religion is that you trust your inner voice. It's about inner meditative experience, not just ritual. So when, in the story that Dilmaya told me, her uncle, who was a tantric, said to trust, if something flashes into your mind, you should trust that, and trust an idea or a feeling that arises within your body. So you trusted that, and you came here today. I don't know if you got what you were looking for, but I'm very happy that you did, and that our consciousnesses. In the West, we don't trust knowledge unless we know how we know it. So it's all this scientific method and all this stuff, or the newspaper or whatever. But in tantric religion, you will have clairvoyance. You will know things without needing to be taught them from your inner self by becoming clearer and clearer through meditation and through deity worship, as I understand it. So when Dilmaya was really had this strong impulse to go see Neil Barahi, she trusted that and she did it, and she got great rewards as a result. So that's kind of
being original inhabitant of Barahi, I find out that I was not aware of so many stories yet, and I know this by your video. So mainly your video is concerned about Shakti and related to all the dances and practices related to it. So it is, if you see it in terms of Western perspective, it is quite different that you celebrate the power of woman, or woman empowerment, or divine power of goddess, which is not actually it's right in the Western culture. So how do you interpret it in your view that you celebrate the Shakti or power of woman in forms of these culture?
me personally.
Yeah.
Remember that I told you that I came here when I was a little girl, and what I saw here made me feel so well. It was like medicine for a sickness that I didn't know how I had, and the sickness is called Western culture, Western patriarchal culture. And if you're a little girl, you might feel sick and you don't know what's wrong. And you come here where there is the Kumari, and you suddenly feel very well, so something is right. And so you spend your whole life trying to figure out what that is that's right. So obviously, I've learned everything I know from Newar and from the Kathmandu Valley, including how to take care of my mother, how to take care of a baby, everything. How to feed a guest. There are a few things I learned that aren't from here, but not very many. And so just to me, the idea that the earth is alive, and the earth is a feeling, thinking manifestation that has consciousness, and all of us are part of that consciousness, that we're not really separate, is a very, very powerful idea. And what I will say is that when you get beyond the idea of women's empowerment or female empowerment or Shakti, in my sort of deepest trying to struggle to understand Newar culture, I would go to a puja or something that lasted all night. Sometimes I would just have to go to bed. Like I was just so overwhelmed with everything that I can't digest anymore. But at the end of the day, it's about deep equality. It's not about men on top or women on top. What the culture really offered was a vision of very powerful radical equality. And again, we can talk about that another time. But when I was a young woman in my 20s, I was like, yeah. Goddesses, yippee, women on top. But that is not how it ended up. My understanding was of a very truly deep equality that was focused on life and nourishing the best things and protecting the best things of life. And what I will understand from the Kumari is that something that is the most powerful can also be the most vulnerable and needing of protection. So those two things are not a contradiction. Like a little girl, a wonderful little girl, is the most powerful being in the world because she contains the whole future within her. but she's also the most vulnerable and the most important for us to protect. And it may be the same of the earth, right? Or anything else that you can think of. Thank you.